Welcome to those joining with allowing other people to join in. So we'll be getting started in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Welcome to everyone who's just joining. Thank you for being prompt and early. The session will get started in just over a minute. Welcome to everyone just joining. The session will be getting started in about 30 seconds. Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the second session of the day, Fundraising Priorities in Times of Crisis. Very interesting and relevant session, particularly with this huge sweeping change we've seen to the sector over the past few months. I would just like to remind you, if you haven't attended already, that we do have the chat box open. So would encourage you to drop a quick hello and greeting from wherever you are in the world with your name, organization, and country in the chat. It's really helpful for our speakers and organizers to know who is here live. So please do go ahead and send that message. And if you click the blue box, you can see there's an option to send to panelists and attendees. So make sure that everyone sees your message. It doesn't just go to the panelists. If you have questions, please note, don't submit them in the chat, so they might get lost there. If you click the Q&A box, which is separate, you'll see there you can submit your questions throughout, and I know that our moderator will leave plenty of time to take any questions that you submit. You can also upvote your questions if there's questions that are really interesting to you, and comment on questions directly in the Q&A. So please do use that feature. Just a reminder that this session will be recorded and will be available afterwards on the YouTube channel and instantly on Facebook. So we're streaming on Facebook Live right now, and someone will drop a message to the Facebook Live in the chat, so you can catch up on anything or rewatch anything straight away after this session. And finally, we have interpretation on all of these sessions. So if you click the globe button at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the option to listen in Spanish and French. And a big thank you to our team of 4 interpreters who are working away, making sure that this session is more accessible. And so with that, I will hand over to one of the host organizations. So Zdenka, if you can take the floor. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning and good afternoon and good night to all of you. Thank you for joining us for this session. This is definitely a session worth listening to. The topic is something that is very pertinent to all of us who are working in conservation. And this topic is fundraising priorities in times of crisis. I am very happy to introduce a good friend, Pilar Barrera, who is Senior Operations Officer for Partnerships at the Global Environment Facility. Pilar has worked for over 15 years for conservation organizations, local NGO in Colombia, the Nature Conservancy, both in Colombia, and a senior policy advisor in the United States, and more recently as Senior Operations Officer for the Global Environment Facility in Washington, D.C. She has also led successful negotiations for debt for nature swaps in Colombia and Costa Rica, and participated in the negotiation of another debt for nature swap in Indonesia. Pilar will be leading and moderating this great group of panelists that we have. Very proud to see so many women on stage today as well. So thank you, Pilar. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Zdenka. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you joining us today for this session on fundraising priorities in a time of crisis. It is a great pleasure for me to be here in the presence of three extraordinary women. So allow me to introduce them. So we have Charlotte Karibouye. She's the director of the West Africa program for the MAVA Foundation. She's responsible for implementing MAVA's strategy for West Africa, overseeing all projects and partner relations in the region, and managing the MAVA regional office in Dakar. And together with the director, she also jointly manages MAVA's overall project portfolio. Before joining MAVA, Charlotte worked with FIBA for a decade as the Marine Protected Area Program Coordinator, supervising the establishment of the first regional network of marine protected areas in West Africa. She has been involved in several international conservation expert groups, including the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas as Regional Vice Chair and Marine Coordinator for West and Central Africa. Welcome, Charlotte. If you may wave. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, we have Constance Corbier. She's a project manager at the Secretariat of the French Global Environment Facility, FFM. She's responsible for the implementation of the strategy for the protection and enhancement of biodiversity, as well as for the small initiative programs in favor of civil society organizations in the South. Before, she worked at the FAO in Rome, then at the International Affairs Department of the French Environment Ministry, before joining AFD in 2000, where she was responsible for environmental and social diligence in charge of developing the first portfolio of green projects, and lastly, responsible for the evaluation and capitalization program of AFD's environmental projects. Welcome, Constance.
Thank you. Hello.
Our third panelist today is Renu Mittal. She's a program officer in the Environment Programs Oceans Initiative at the Walton Family Foundation. She manages the foundation's grant making in Chile and Peru, where she works closely with fishermen, industry leaders, local communities, the government, and scientists to put in place policies and practices that improve fisheries management and sustain fishing communities. Previously, Renu was a program officer at the Helmsley Charitable Trust, where she led the conservation program in Madagascar, Galapagos, and Marine. Her focus included effective management and expansion of marine and terrestrial protected areas, promotion on locally managed marine areas, sustainable fisheries, and tourism and creation of sustainable livelihoods. Welcome, Renu.
Hi, thank you.
So before I engage the panelists in today's discussion, I would like to say just a few introductory words to set the stage. It is well known that biodiversity provides humans with the majority of the resources required to sustain life. The World Economic Forum Nature Risk Rising Report has concluded that more than half of global GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature. However, or maybe because of that dependency, we know that biodiversity is declining at an unprecedented rate, and that the pressures driving this decline are intensifying. Nature and biodiversity loss pose a serious threat to human health, to the economy and livelihoods, and they're also exacerbated by climate change. Biodiversity loss and ultimately human well-being are very connected to the COVID-19 pandemic that is devastating people and economies around the world. Experts say that this crisis is a direct consequence of economic growth and the degradation of ecosystems caused by human activities, which have allowed people to be closer to wildlife, often in crowded markets that provide a breeding ground ideal for spreading serious diseases for which humans have no prior immunity. We then must take a comprehensive and concerted effort to value, protect, and restore nature and combat the root causes of biodiversity loss. Regarding the cost, estimates indicate that to reverse the decline in biodiversity by 2030, the additional funding needed is around $824 billion per year. the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are being felt across many sectors relevant to global development. And as such, donor countries are funding new initiatives to alleviate the impacts of this crisis. In the face of the pandemic, both in Europe and the US, politicians, business leaders, experts, and environmental activists are talking about the need for a green recovery, investing in carbon neutral economic activities, cleaner air and water quality, and protecting biodiversity and transforming agricultural production to more sustainable practices to create jobs, improve livelihoods, and reduce the vulnerability of communities to pandemics like this one. It is clear that governments cannot do this job alone. Private sector, NGOs, philanthropists, multilaterals, and others should come together to ensure the adequate financial resources mobilization that this challenge poses. With this backdrop, environmental funds, such as those which are members of Red Lac and CAFE, are well positioned to be conveners, linking private investors to public authorities, the NGOs, and local communities to contribute to this green recovery by facilitating the replication and scaling up of conservation efforts towards those required levels. Having said that, most environmental funds are still very dependent on resources from international cooperation, bilateral and multilateral agencies. Given this dependency, it's important for environmental funds to adapt quickly to the new reality and search for opportunities and alternatives to fundraising. And these are some of the challenges and also some of the issues that I would like to talk to our panelists today. So I have a first question that I would like to address maybe first to Constance. So Constance, as I mentioned, the donor community has responded to the COVID pandemic by deploying rapid response funds to face this challenge. In your view, how do you think that donors' funding priorities will change in the short and long run because of this pandemic?
Yes, thank you, Pilar. Thank you for the inviting FFM to this meeting. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to see all these people, and I realize I am not alone behind my screen, but I have all these friends attending, and I see a lot of names I know, so I'm quite happy and also a bit frustrated not to meet really, but I will try to do my best to communicate what I want to say to everybody. So to make short, just a quick recall of the mandate of FFM. The mandate of FFM, the French Facility for Global Environment, as a public fund established in 1994 by the French government, is to support innovative projects for the preservation of global environment and local sustainable development, especially on biodiversity, climate change, land degradation, and pollution in developing countries. So to answer to your question, in the short run, FFM is currently helping its beneficiaries, in particular NGOs and civil society, to cope with the first social and economic impacts of the crisis on a case-by-case basis, with the main objective to maintain salaries, even if activities are delayed, and as appropriate, to consider shift in activities that were planned and also shift in the time frame. The FFM tries also to cope with reverse effects of the crisis on the environment that we observe in several of our projects. I will not mention them, but if there is any questions, we can provide examples. In the medium and long run now, crisis, we believe, is also the opportunity to initiate transformative changes needed across all drivers: economic, political, social, technological. This is why FFM will stay all the more focused on the approach that makes its specificity, as we believe it remains crucially relevant to cope with the consequences of the crisis. And this is to say, first, linking conservation and development for the benefit of local communities. Second, promoting innovation, including institutional innovation, with the aim of initiating changes to be scaled up and spilled over. Third, building partnerships at all levels and between all types of players: civil society, public, private sector, governmental, involving all the actors, including at local level, in a sustainable path. And fourth, last but not least, learning from our experiences, develop a kind of what we call evaluation culture.
Thank you so much, Constance.
Thank you.
Before I move to our other panelists, I would like to remind participants to use the Q&A box. You can ask your questions there. Please say your name, type your name, the country where you're based, and your organization. You can ask any question related to the topic. Charlotte, I would like to turn to you now with a similar question, but from the perspective of Africa. How are donor priorities changing because of this pandemic? Charlotte, you may unmute yourself.
Times that we are on mute. So thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure really being on this panel with such special people, and also seeing such known names from friends and other colleagues we know we work with. So you probably know that MAVA is a philanthropic foundation, family foundation. So we've been funding actually biodiversity conservation for since '96. So, and if you look at the priorities today, I can only speak about the MAVA experience. What we have been doing, we have really, like FEFEM also and many other funders, we have decided to have an emergency program first, to respond, to have a quick response to the difficulties that people were facing. So with this urgent funding, we could cover, for instance, unexpected expenses, or even, people lost a lot of funding due to the COVID situation, for instance, because sometimes they had resources from tourism or from other activities. So this fund is there for that. But not only, sometimes people just need to talk, not to feel alone behind the screen, as Constance was saying. So we have like a possibility for people to have some discussion, this is a discussion forum for peer learning on leadership through the crisis. But we also have some other activities in terms of being flexible and giving additional support. So in the midterm, I would say that we are really trying to support our grantees, really to think about the rebuilding for resilience. This is not changing our priorities. We are adding actually new things to those activities that we are already funding. Maybe an example is that we have been giving a possibility to have a free online course on fundraising, because we think this is extremely important by this time. People need to, things are changing. People are trying to find out what are other possibilities to get funding. So this is something we are doing, and it is also followed by a call for proposal where people can tell us how they want to improve their fundraising capacity. So this is just one example. But we are also, for the long term, we are really thinking on how can we maybe influence, the rebuilding, recreating a new future. So what we've been doing, for instance, is that we have launched a call for proposal, for people just to tell us whether they have some innovative ideas on how to influence the process, all these packages, stimulus packages that are now being discussed. Many are not really green. So an example would be to tell us how they want to influence the greening of the stimulus package in their countries, or they can also tell us whether they have some good idea on how they could launch some debt for nature swaps, example. So this is a call that we have launched a few days ago, where we will have people also from Africa, but not only from West Africa, also from the Mediterranean, giving us some example on how they really want to influence that. A very specific thing maybe for our program now is that we have already projects ongoing until 2022 But we think that with the COVID situation, the context is different. So there are some additional challenges. What we'll do now, we will have the possibility to have additional activities, you know, on top of what is already ongoing in the conservation, species conservation, or marine protected areas, or fisheries, or, you know, on infrastructure development. So what can people do actually to also go in that direction or a better future for now? So these are some of the things that we have been doing at MAVA, not changing completely our initial priorities, but just adding some new things to tackle the new situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for that very comprehensive answer. So there is a question from the audience to Constance, but before I go to you, Constance, with the possible response, I would like to give the opportunity to Renu as well to add anything to this, change in funding priorities for donors.
I think, first, thank you for this opportunity to speak with such amazing women. So it's a super honor, and I appreciate it. I think talking about the funding at large, the funding space, we're seeing, the approach changing a bit about, around COVID. I think you see, as both Charlotte and Constance mentioned, a platform for just to speak with our partners in the field, and being able to understand what is happening with the government, being more available to find solutions or navigate this really difficult time. I think we've also, trying to ease up the way that we are doing reporting, or that we are just giving space for our partners as they navigate it. I think one thing that we're starting to see going forward is also, how do you approach your grant making, and looking at projects that will build more resiliency versus, just kind of, we're so reactive. It's just the nature of our approach, or just what's in front of us, but trying to be, find projects that are more resilient, but also I think recognizing that we need to build the capacity of these organizations that are on the ground, so that when, unfortunately, not to sound so pessimistic, but when the next, pandemic happens, rather than if the pandemic happens, we're not scrambling to figure out what do we do next, but that we've put in, these safeguards so that we can pivot and make the changes and protect the environment, protect the marine systems, so that we're not struggling the next time.
Thank you so much, Renu. So, Constance, there is a question from the floor, from the audience, from Sean Nazerali. He's asking about whether FFM is going to really add new funding in these times of needs and in the near future, or this is just a reallocation of existing funding.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, for the question. As I was saying, we have two different kind of projects. We have ongoing projects that have already been signed and allocated, and in that case, we try to discuss with the beneficiaries to see if some shift of component or activities or new activities could be discussed together in order to cope with the priorities and the difficulties they are facing with this crisis. For instance, when we are working with pastoralists and conservancies in North Kenya, we are looking for helping them to cope with the loss of revenue coming from tourism, loss of revenue coming from closure of meat market, local markets, things like that. So this is for projects already allocated. And then we have 4 years based on quadriennium strategy. And we have, as you know, like Jeff, we have money for 4 years, and this has not been diverted, or we have guarantee to use all that till now. There is no restriction, so we have 3 additional years now for this strategy. And for these coming projects, we will focus on priorities in order to face first more resilience both ecological and social resilience, and including for people living in remote places on coastal areas or places where the vulnerability is particularly at stake. And then we will try also to promote projects with co-benefits from climate change, biodiversity, pollution challenge, as we are aware that there will be competition on resources, including for environment challenges. So we will favor co-benefit projects.
Thank you, Constance, and thank you, Sean, for making that question. In this context of changing priorities, and also you have already talked about some of those in terms of sustainability, resilience, how do you think in this context will this affect the programming focus of the environmental funds, like the ones that are part of Red Light and CAFE? How should the fundraising strategy change to adapt to these changing priorities? And I will start with Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you. Pilar, you know, it's a very difficult situation, and I think it's really a huge challenge also for conservation trust funds. The good thing is that, you know, CTF are actually meant to be more stable tools, you know, more than others. And I think that in times of crisis like this one, that should be really the opportunity for CTF to showcase that they are a more stable alternative for funding, that maybe institutionally also they are more, you know, solid. So I would think that it is important for CTFs to showcase right now the impact of the work they've been doing. It's important to showcase, like for instance, how important it is today, you know, to make this strong link between nature and health. Everyone is talking more and more about that. Also, the link between nature, health, and also climate change. So I think that in those new discussions that are coming, CTFs need to position themselves very clearly. This is the first one. The second one, I think that the CTFs also should be aware of maybe some new opportunities that are upcoming now, you know, in terms of funding opportunities. People are now talking more and more about the for swap, you know, for nature swap opportunities. People are talking about more and more. It was already there. You know, payment for ecosystem services and so on. I think there we need really to be very clear that CTF have to have this very strong force of proposition to be able to come with proposition, but also to be able to accompany and support the countries, because many countries really the capacity might not be there. So I think it would be very important that these opportunities is used by CTF. Another point, for instance, I told you about our call for proposal that is very targeted to this context. Maybe CTF should also think about their criteria in terms of, you know, in terms of fundraising, adding that, you know, layer above what they've been doing in terms of also documenting that they are supporting also protected areas to deal with the COVID situation, you know. So that would be maybe also another option for trying to diversify and to increase the chances for fundraising. I will stop maybe here. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. I really like your comment about their role in, you know, in the long-term sustainability. You know, they're here for the long haul. Does anybody, Constance or Renu, do you want to add anything to this? How can they take advantage of opportunities? Because there are some challenges, but also some opportunities arising from this.
Yes.
Go ahead, Constance, yes.
Thank you, Pilar. Charlotte, we are fully in line, and I fully agree that CTF has to show the case, have to report, and to prove they are the best instrument, the best tool to channel additional funds towards conservation and towards livelihood improvement. So for us, one specific opportunity, as you said, Charlotte, is for instance, payment for environmental services. And there are opportunities coming from responsibility, well, charging the CTF to deal with public funds, such as payment for environmental services or offset compensation offsets, things like that. And also in charge of catalyzing private sector towards conservation. So this means for us, CTF will have to work more in 4 areas. First, be strongly articulated with government policies. Just for donors and as public donor, it's very important for us to provide funds to CTF, provided there is a guarantee that CTF is not in the air outside of governmental policies. So this has to be strongly articulated. Second, and it's also a value added of CTF, they have to push private cooperation to address environmental and social issues, because maybe with the crisis there will be a risk of wall-off of all the environmental social regulations because the economy must recover. So private sector is not a good idea by say. Private sector is a big opportunity provided there is safeguards and there is a way to bend the curve towards a sustainable path. So to this respect, FFM warmly welcome the publication, well, I think it's tomorrow officially, of the new CFA practice standards for CTF, because they specifically added environmental, social, and governance standards, and which is excellent. And CTF are invited, although it's voluntary, CTF are invited to follow them. Then, as said Charlotte, there is a very, very urgent need for CTF to be able to measure and report on their impact on the environment and on conservation. And last, as said Charlotte, again, maybe CTF should combine more environmental and social objectives, aiming at more ecological and socioeconomic resilience, and trying to connect all this. And blue economy is a good illustration of that, because restoration of mangrove, promoting blue biotrade, etc., is a way to deal with both and with different objectives in the same nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Constance. And we're going to be talking a bit later about blue economy, blue recovery, and also the link with social resilience and livelihoods. But I want to bring a follow-up question from the floor, actually from Paulina Arroyo, a good friend. Hi, Paulina. She's with Moore Foundation, and following on Charlotte's mentioning of how they're trying to influence the economic recovery to benefit nature conservation, she would like to ask the panelists, what recommendations do you have to ensure economic recovery incorporates conservation and social equity? And I think, Constance, you were talking a bit about that. So do you want to expand a bit more on that concept? When you're trying to promote economic recovery, how do you incorporate conservation and social equity?
Exactly what I was just trying to develop was sustainable investment has to be found and promoted, and in a context of recuperation of businesses, this may be a bit forgotten by big corporations if we do not, if environmental community is not here to remind the objectives and the impact of their activities. For instance, if you read a lot of literature, recent literature on the impact of the crisis, you have the impression that mining, deforestation, land grasping could increase. So this means that government need to pave the way, and then CTF could be a good, safeguard dog to make sure that this private sector is not doing anything without any control and any watching of the impact, and social and environmental impact together, of course.
Brenda, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think what's here is there's an opportunity for innovation as well, and to start, going towards a more holistic approach and building the economy while also supporting the livelihoods that we depend on it, and the environment as well. So I mean, think about maybe doing engineering with nature, right? Like if you're going to build a seawall, why don't you build an artificial reef instead? So the multiple benefits that come from that. It may bring tourism. It would support the biodiversity in that space, but it would also make the coastal communities and the coastlines more resilient to the ever-changing climate change. So I think we need to be innovative in our approach and start thinking a bit more holistically as we start trying to build the economy again, and not kind of going back to our old ways and trying to just fund projects that benefit a few. So I mean that's a little bit to add to that. I know we're limited on time.
No, I think we're good on time actually. So
okay, good.
If you want to expand a bit more, it's
No,
fine.
go ahead. I know Charlotte wanted to add too.
No, not really. Not really, but I think I totally agree with the innovation, need for innovation and creativity, and need for holistic approach. I also think that, we need to talk to other people. I like to say always that we conservation people, we like to talk to each other, among us, among ourselves. But we have to now, start talking to those people outside, not always the how do you call them, the usual suspects, So let's talk to the business world, let's talk to the policymakers, because I think that interestingly, a month ago I was invited to a meeting where we had to discuss and to give some inputs to the National Recovery Program. We really have the opportunity to be there, to be part of the conversation, and to influence. I think CTF should be really present in the countries, in the region where they are, intervening, to be able actually to be among those who are now defining the things, because we just hear that people are trying to green the recovery, but it's not always really the case. So I think we need to be there and to be contributing, giving ideas, and if necessary, supporting that. That's the idea of the call I was mentioning. CTFs could just ask, we want to fund something on thinking about greening the recovery in this country. Those kind of things, I think we really need to get out of our comfort zone. Thank you.
Yes, Renu, go ahead.
So I think it's what Charlotte and both Constance is saying is absolutely right about inclusiveness, and I want to be explicit about also when we talk about inclusiveness and making sure we're all at the table, stakeholders, that means that we're talking about women. Women are never at the table, and we're slowly starting to push for that. So I think this whole recovery has to include gender equity, it has to include the indigenous communities, and it has to include the communities that live by these resources. And if they're not, we're not going to have success. They are the ones that are the stewards of the land or the water. And so I think we have an incredible opportunity, and I think definitely funders are are in a space right now to sit at the table and influence that. And I think we need to be explicit about that inclusiveness and the participatory process in this as we start to move forward.
So you're both, Renu and Charlotte, talking about inclusiveness, but also you're talking about expanding to other stakeholders. And you mentioned, Charlotte, the private sector.
Yes.
So I want to ask, how are you really trying to engage the private sector? For us at the Jeff has been, a process, many years, 25 years or so. So it's not easy. But I would like to hear your comments regarding, private sector engagement in this green and blue recovery effort.
Yeah, thanks, Pilar. This is a difficult one. I think that it's not easy to engage the private sector. What we've been doing, actually, we have actually been setting up, how can we call them, like fora, stakeholders fora, or around very specific and topics. For instance, around fisheries, around infrastructure development, around oil and gas, offshore activities in West Africa. I'm talking about the program in West Africa. And really the effort is to bring in the private sector so that they're aware of what people are doing and also that they can contribute. So an example is, for instance, trying to get the private sector to fund ecological monitoring or marine resources monitoring, in terms of trying to see whether there are some impacts, from oil and gas activities. So, and you know that today we have maybe to appeal to have those people talking about their social and corporate responsibility. But we have to be careful, I always say we have to be careful because, sometimes it's tricky. I sometimes give an example when I say, for instance, it is very interesting and important to have those social and corporate responsibility activities, but they have to be related to conservation, or they have to be contributing, to strengthening the capacity, the local or national capacity to do that. Because for me, for instance, it doesn't make any sense having a company funding water, which is extremely important. I think it's really important. But in a project where we are talking about pollution in the sea, we are talking about, I think that it has to be related. For me, it would be more interesting if such a company would fund things that are really reinforcing the capacity of people to be able to do that. Another example is, for instance, the fact that countries are also increasingly adopting standards and norms, ecological norms and social also, to be able to regulate those activities. And I think that here, engaging the private sector is to be able to say, okay, how are you actually applying those norms and standards? So I think that we are trying to do that. We are not yet there, but I have to say that this is something that is requiring a lot of effort and a lot of commitment from different stakeholders. Thank you.
Does anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd like to add. I think it's extremely difficult to bring private investors to the field, as Charlotte said. And I think some of the things that we've been trying to do at the Walton Family Foundations and our fisheries work is, how do you put in the enabling conditions into, the environment so that you're de-risking that the opportunities, the investment, so that private sector feels more comfortable coming in. So like, can you do things like putting in policy in place, building regulatory frameworks? Can you bring the science in so that we know what's happening, and then bring those investors in? And I 100% agree that at some point these investors then should be giving back to those communities. If they're benefiting economically, like a piece of that needs to come back to those communities or that region. But I think a lot of it comes with having to find a way where public dollars, so the government dollars and funding dollars, philanthropic dollars can come in and build those conditions, like figure out what are the enabling conditions needed to de-risk so that we can bring in private investors in.
Thank you, Renu. Yes. I would like to turn maybe to one question from the audience. This one again addressed to Constance. Is the French facility funding programs in Central America? Are there any? And what is the role of the French embassy to apply for financial support from FFM? If there is any role of the French embassy in Central America, in the countries of Central America.
Okay, thank you. Just to correct some misunderstandings from participants, FFM is not AFD first, even if AFD, the French Agency for Development, is part of our governance. We are managing Secretariat of FM, in which I am working, is managing a fund which is only grants, and it's given by the French Ministry of Finance. And around the table of the governance of FFM, you have AFD, but also all the ministries represented by their embassies in the countries. So if a project is submitted to FFM, it can be submitted either by AFD, either by any ministry around the table. And in that case, if it's, for instance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Ministry of Environment, the French embassy in the country can rely the request, provided it's in line with our eligibility criteria. And you can find a lot of information in the website of FFM about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We have quite a few questions actually from the floor, and I want to give opportunity to answer most of them, if not all. So we have only 14 minutes left or less. But I wanted to turn to Renu about the marine realm before I go to the questions from the floor. What are the most relevant challenges and risks in the marine conservation realm, and how can donor organizations react to these challenges? Also, what is the role in the Blue Recovery Path?
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a big question, Pilar. Thank you. I think we know what are some of the main challenges in the marine realm. I mean, you have climate change. It's changing, you know, how communities fish and where they fish, and to areas that are just too difficult to fish in. And these are small scale fishers, you know, so I think that's a big issue, at least around, you know, the fishery space. We have a lot of illegality in fishing, a lot of IUU happening, shark finning that's, you know, disturbing the biodiversity. I think, you know, we have plastics. Plastics is such a big issue in the marine system, but now it's even exacerbated more because of COVID, and we're seeing PPE equipment coming into the waters. So, you know, the list could go on, right, about like the challenges in the marine system. And I think, you know, thinking about recovery and blue recovery, the approach has to be, it's social and economic. It has to be integrated, socioeconomic approach. And you know, I will be a broken record when I say, you know, it has to be inclusive, has to include women, has to have gender equity and Indigenous communities. But, you know, I think what we're seeing, you know, is that there's a lot of basic things that are missing. And it's you know, we see this globally. There's a lack of regulatory framework for how to use the ocean. You know, how do you there's basic skills that are needed around like marine spatial planning, and it's things like, how do you use the ocean? Let's say you want to do marine pharmaceutical exploration. Where do you do that? Where's the zoning? Like, do these countries, do these regions know how to zone aquaculture? If you have an aquaculture, do they have water quality standards, monitoring standards? So I think these are all things that we need to look at as we try to build back the marine system, to make sure they're well managed, so that we can, you know, use the system for both, for livelihood purposes, for to recover the economy, but then to also manage and support the health of the oceans, because we will need them. I mean, you have over 3 billion people that rely on the system for food, for protein, for their revenue source. So I think we have to be really thoughtful about their approach. We have to, these regulatory frameworks are also kind of holding us back from innovation, without, knowing what the regulations are in a system. How do you expect an investor to come in and say, yeah, I will invest in this innovation, but I don't actually know what's going to happen to my IP, my intellectual property. Does the government own it? Do I keep it? I mean, these simple questions, it sounds simple, but I mean, these are things that I think as donors, we need to be asking as well as we start to approach these efforts to support the blue recovery. I think you had a second part of the question. I might have missed it. Sorry.
No, I think you answered it. Yes. Thank you. Because my question was about livelihoods, but you already mentioned it. So I think we only have 10 minutes left. So I would really like, to provide answers to these very, very interesting questions from the audience. I'm going to go just in the order in which they were posted, and some of them have already been answered in your comments. Camila Monteiro, she asked, do you think environmental funds have a role to play in working with impacting industries to help them implement compensation and offset projects? And who wants to answer this question? Constance, go ahead.
Thank you. This is a good opportunity. Hello, Camila. Thank you for the question. This is a good opportunity to mention, even if it's not completely decided, that we are instructing 2 interesting projects, one related to what exactly Renu was mentioning. So we are with AFD preparing a support to CBF, Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, in order not to put money on the capital of the trust fund, but to help CBF to be more have more impact on the ground in both marine and coastal areas. So, and including with a component on blue biotrade. So it's a way to show the way we are working. And we are also, and this is what I wanted to mention, we are working with Red Lac and CAFE, the 2 networks, on kind of new Project K. Everybody knows Project K we had with Mava and Jeff, but now that Project K is closed, we thought that it was interesting to use the networks to promote innovation for channeling private sector additional funds. So this means it's a way to attract private fundings, to challenge them on the innovation, and to challenge the CTFs on the possibility of dealing with the innovative finance coming from private sector. So this new project, whose name is Bridging the Gap between CTF and private sector. So this bridge project, I cross my fingers, but it's now, it will be presented to our board very soon. I hope FFM can support that, because Red Lac and CAFE are definitely good platforms of actors, very creative, very innovative, and we fully believe that community of practices, community of actors such as Red Lac, CAFE, CFA, but also Medpan in Mediterranean or Rampao in West Africa are good places where we are more intelligent, when we are several than alone.
Thank you so much, Constance, for that very comprehensive answer. There's a question on protected areas, so I would like to address it to Charlotte, given her experience. Several industries have received bailouts and economic incentive packages from governments. National parks and conservation areas are also in need of these type of money transfers to strengthen the provision of ecosystem services. How can we support the developing country governments to build these incentive packages for strengthening the national protected area system? This is a question from Cesar Viteri in Galapagos, Ecuador, in the Charles Darwin Research Station. Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks, Pilar. I have to come back to what I was saying a few minutes ago when I was talking about the payment for ecosystem services, because we need indeed to showcase the value of protected areas. Constance did not mention that AFD, I think it was, or FFM, sorry, did fund a study, you know, on the ecosystem services of, for instance, the National Park of Bandarguin in Mauritania. And it has shown that that very park, the value of the ecosystem services for carbon sequestration and also for fisheries is about $180 million or euro a year. So the cost for managing that park, you know, is around 1 million a year. Can you see the difference? So we need to develop arguments, very clear arguments, showing that investing in protected area is worthwhile. It is actually making more money. So I think there is a need probably for capacity building, but also for producing their information, that argument, and making it available to decision makers. This is something that is lacking a lot until now. People really say, okay, we know it's important, but it's not clear. And I also think that we need to show those values related to things that are relevant to the communities, to the economy, and to the population in general, like water, you know, what is the importance of a protected area for access to drinkable water? What is the value for fish resources? What is the value for forest products, you know? So I think maybe going that path would actually help to be able to say that we need actually to include then investing in protected area into our packages, because it's a good investment. Maybe my colleagues do have additional examples.
No, I 100% agree with Charlotte. And I think it is about the ecosystem services payment. And I'm wondering, you know, this is kind of a question back to everyone, and it might be a little controversial, but, you know, how do we, these companies that did receive bailouts, these, especially those that are in the tourism industry, these airlines, these cruise ships and whatnot, you know, why not push also the governments to say, hey, we're going to apply a tax on you or some kind of fee because you're benefiting from our ecosystem, our protected areas. You are getting people to come to our countries. You know, they're visiting our parks and our you know, our different systems. And why do you get the bailout and we receive nothing? And yet we're struggling on our side. I think this is, you know, something that we should push for. We should figure out, how do we advocate? How do we outreach to the governments to say, you know, you need to push back a little bit on these industries and get, you know, revenue from their benefits. And I think in addition to what Charlotte was saying at the end is also that, you know, if the government starts to do bailouts in these various countries, they should incorporate that into the requirement for the bailout. So I think the U.S. did it. The U.S. has done it, and you know, we saw some of the many mistakes that happened in the first round, and I think, you know, we can all learn what to do on the next round and in other countries, and be a little bit more, put in a lot more restrictions, put in some mandates, and say, we'll bail you out, but you got to give it back to us.
Wow, there's so many questions that are left unanswered because we only have 2 minutes left. I mean, it's so little time for such a big subject. So I just wanted to wrap up now. Thank you, Constance, Renu, Charlotte, for a very interesting and you know, amazing session. Thank you so much to all the people who posted questions and those who are observing this session. I'm sorry we cannot really answer all of them. Again, we need at least another hour. So thank you so much, and I want to give the floor again to Zdenka. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pilar. Thank you so much, Pilar, Charlotte, Renu. It's an Constance. It has been amazing. If you have been reading through the comments, you will see so many wonderful comments about having this female power, these powerful women participating in this panel. Thank you so much for your insights. I think it is really relevant to conservation trust funds as well, and to the rest of the community, not only to the Conservation Trust Fund community as well. And many challenges ahead, many of which we will continue to discuss during these next 2 days in terms of how to best prepare for fundraising in times of crisis. So thank you very much, Pilar, and all of you for participating. And in the same aspect and spirit, I would now like to introduce 2 more panelists who will be joining us for a very exciting new launch. And as you know, yesterday we launched FinMar, which is an initiative which will work as a Marine Conservation Finance Coalition, because many of our countries in Red Lake are connected through the ocean. Well, there is something else that connects us clearly, and it is migratory species and birds especially. So I am very proud to share now this space with both Ian Davidson and Aurelio Ramos, who are joining us. Ian is the Regional Director of BirdLife International in the Americas. He's formerly the Director of Birds and Wildlife at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which is based in Washington, D.C. Ian has worked over 25 years as an ecologist and conservation leader throughout Latin America, the Caribbean, USA, and Canada. So welcome, Ian. And also welcome to Aurelio Ramos, who I also had the pleasure of working with at the Nature Conservancy for many years. Aurelio is the Senior Vice President of the International Partnerships Program for the National Audubon Society. And he also began his career at the Nature Conservancy in 2003, where he led pioneering conservation strategies through incentive-based funding in the Andean landscapes of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela, and also led the development financing strategy for water resources for Latin America for conservation projects that improve the quality and quantity of water. In fact, this model water resources financing fund has grown to more than 35 funds globally, which we hope will also become members of CAFE and Red Lake, as they have a very similar structure to ours. So thank you very much, Aurelio and Ian, both for joining us for this exciting launch. And Ian, you have the floor.
Yes, I just want to make sure that you can hear me.
We can hear you, Ian.
Good. Well, good evening. As you know, my name is Ian Davidson. I'm the Regional Director for BirdLife International in the Americas, and it's truly an honor to be able to present to you an exciting new initiative that we are calling Conserva Aves, Conserva International and Audubon. My organization, BirdLife International, is a global partnership of NGOs striving to conserve birds, their habitats, and global biodiversity, and working with people towards the sustainable use of natural resources. Currently, BirdLife, my organization, is working in about 120 countries through national grassroots conservation NGOs. Its membership includes about 2.5 million people across 116 countries and territories, and in the Americas we are active in about 19 countries. As the BirdLife partner in the US, National Audubon protects birds and the places they need today and tomorrow, and throughout the Americas using science, advocacy, education, and on-the-ground conservation. And it supports and strengthens national governments and grassroots conservation organization. Its reach is astounding, over 10 million people monthly, through its networks, and has a direct membership of about 1 million individuals. You all know Red Lake, so I won't introduce that to you, and we will hear a little bit more from Red Lake in a bit. But to put it into context, we live on a single planet. Everything is interconnected, as we know. Billions of birds migrate through the Western Hemisphere. They know no frontiers. They don't know borders. The Canada warbler is an example of one of 500 species that moves from North America in the billions to Latin America and the Caribbean. It leaves the boreal forest in September, which is around now, and migrates across the Caribbean to northern South America, including the vast Amazon. And on its northward migration, travels up and along the Central American Isthmus, covering over 10,000 kilometers annually. And in Latin America, it shares habitat with hundreds of other species, including many endemic and highly threatened species. For me and for us, bird life, or birds are perhaps the best indicator of the health of the planet. We know so much about this taxonomic group. Populations of many species are in decline, and some in some areas are in the brink of disappearing. And the main causes are habitat loss and degradation. In Latin America and the Caribbean are at a turning point, huge threats from development and, of course, climate change in our backyard. These globally important bird areas that you can see in the map in the red, overlapping with the green areas of the protected areas, are critical sites for birds and biodiversity. All these sites have been mapped by our partnership throughout the Americas. And most of them are not well represented in the protected areas. Indeed, 70% of these essential places are not represented. And if you include gaps in areas needed for migratory birds and climate thresholds, the need is even bigger. So I'll turn it over to Zenka and Aurelio to speak more about the specifics of this new initiative.
Thank you very much, Ian. For REDLAC, this is an incredible opportunity to work with two well-recognized organizations that are promoting also bird life and conservation. And as you know, and we have been focusing a lot in our sessions on the importance of the post-2020 goals, the 30 by 30 goal offers a huge opportunity to start thinking about how to create and endow and sustain over time larger protected areas. Through this particular initiative, an opportunity arises not only to work at a national scale, but also to focus at a subnational scale at the municipal level with indigenous lands, seeking ways also to protect many of these lands in this area. For REDLAC, this is an enormous opportunity, not only for the funds that will be directly involved in this process, but also to show this connectivity and to show the scale, and mainly to show ways in which we can sustain these efforts and contribute to these post-2020 goals in the long term. So this is an opportunity for us to help leverage, but also to help sustain. So this is an opportunity also to have a vision of conservation, of connectivity, and of success at a hemispheric scale that spans all the way from Canada and the United States to Argentina and Chile. Very excited about joining this effort, Aurelio, and I now leave it to you to explain what Conserva Aves will be doing in the following years.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all of you for being here. I'm very excited on again, partnering with great institutions. Our goal is to create an economic and technical incentive to catalyze the declaration of around 80 to 100 subnational protected areas, totaling between 1.3 and 2 million hectares that are important for migratory and resident birds in 5 countries by 2027. Let me explain a little bit what we mean by technical. So we are we're basing this initiative on a successful proven model that was called Conserva Colombia, that was developed a few years back in Colombia, where more than 200,000 hectares were declared at a subnational level, strengthening more than 40 local organizations. We are going to be creating playbooks on how to declare protected areas by country. Basically, what we're trying to do is fine-tune or put in a single document, so we are not reinventing every time how this declaration happens. And we're going to be providing, we're going to be developing together with our BirdLife partners and other organizations and REDLAC members, the training and the strengthening modules. So when we develop this, the process of the declaration of these new protected areas, they have sound business plans that will allow us to maximize the results on their financial sustainability, that they are inclusive, that they are bringing the right partners to take the decisions that are made. On the economic side, what Conserva Colombia, and right now we're estimating, is that it costs around $200,000 to develop the process on the declaration of these areas for around and it takes around 2 years. Half of those resources are going to be put by Conserva Aves, and half of those comes from our local partners. Local partners are local NGOs that bring together corporations and municipalities to make and trigger a process to create these local subnational protected areas. We're envisioning doing calls of proposals where we're going to be receiving proposals as it was done in Conserva Colombia. And we are going to be prioritizing, again, areas, as Ian said, that are important for birds, also for migratory, and that have a very clear climate threshold. So we're going to be developing together with the partners and the local partners, creating with the state of the science, a good portfolio that you will try to reduce the gaps that you saw on the previous map. This is a $20 million estimated initiative. We are right now in the process of starting our fundraising part, and we are going to be spending the next year structuring the project with our partners, and we're talking about a cost of around $870,000 to create all the processes and the playbooks and the agreements to make this thing happen. So we are extremely excited and very thankful for our partners, and we'll have some very good news soon as we are developing and structuring this proposal. Anyone who is interested, please contact Zdenka or Ian or myself, and we can go into further details. So Zdenka, back to you, and thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Aurelio. We are very excited with this new initiative that we are launching together, and hope to be able to share with you next year a lot of the progress we will have been making and making this a reality. Thank you everyone for participating in this wonderful session, both in the fundraising in times of crisis, and also in the launch of this exciting new initiative. We will now be closing the session and beginning again in 20 minutes with a very interesting and necessary session, which is safeguards. As you know, as conservation trust funds, as organizations, we are being asked more every day to have very good social and environmental safeguards in place. We heard a lot about how important this is for donors. And so we hope that this session will help us understand how not to reinvent the wheel as we move forward in creating the environmental and social safeguards for our organizations. We will be beginning in 20 minutes. We hope you can join us for that session. And we thank all of those who participated in this wonderful session on fundraising. Thank you, everyone.